So who are the co-sponsors of this event? CAPA, Chicago Area Peace Action, works to promote justice and peace by educating and mobilizing Chicago area residents and students to promote human and planet-oriented policies. Evanston Ceasefire were a group of individuals who had originally set out to get the city council to pass a ceasefire resolution. And while that didn't happen, we're still working to continue local efforts for Palestinian liberation. The Illinois Coalition for Human Rights advocates for justice and peace in the Middle East in accordance with international law, with a focus on US policies and actions related to Palestine and Israel. And the Lake Street Church Peace and Justice Committee are members of Lake Street Church, this church, who act against injustice and for peace. So what is BDS? As some of you might be familiar with BDS, it stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. It was founded in 2005 and inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement. And it just upholds the simple principle that Palestinians deserve human rights, just like everybody else. And it urges Israel to comply with international law because, as we know, they're currently occupying Palestinian land, discriminating against Palestinian citizens of Israel, and denying Palestinian refugees the right to return to their homes. It's become a global movement, and it's made up of unions, academic associations, churches, and grassroots organizations, including it is endorsed by the Movement for Black Lives, the World Council of Churches, and Israeli professors such as Nev Gordon, Gideon Levy, and Miko Peled. And it also has 86% of Palestinians supporting it. Next slide. So to get a little bit more into each letter, the B stands for boycott, as we know, which means withdrawing support from the apartheid regime, withdrawing support from any sporting, cultural, and academic institutions that are complicit with the apartheid regime, and as well as any international companies that are engaged in violations of Palestinian human rights. For example, Chevron, HP, Cisco, and there are others that can be found on the BDS website. The D is for divestment, which urges banks, city councils, churches, pension funds, and universities to withdraw investments from the state of Israel, and as well as international companies that sustain the apartheid regime. And sanctions pressures governments to fulfill their legal obligations by banning business with illegal Israeli settlements, ending military trade and free trade agreements, and suspending Israel's membership into international forums such as UN bodies while they are not complying with international law. Thank you. BDS is a nonviolent movement, and they call for ending Israel's occupation of all Arab lands and dismantling the separation wall, recognizing the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties, which is stipulated in UN Resolution 194. I'll pass it over to Leslie.
Thanks so much. Next slide. So, as I think we know, boycotts have a long and extremely honorable place in American history and in international history as a means for oppressed people to achieve justice. And probably the best known in terms of US history is, of course, the Montgomery bus boycott, which helped to launch the civil rights movement. Another extremely well-known case of boycotts working extremely well was the Delano grape strike organized by Cesar Chavez. But of course, the boycott, divest, sanctions movement was largely modeled on the South African anti-apartheid movement and the international boycott that went on for many years, involving people from all over the world, involving banning South Africa's participation in sporting bodies like the Olympics, and in terms of banning them from cultural and artistic organizations as well. So the idea that a boycott could involve cultural, artistic, as well as business and trade organizations, is not something new, but it's something that has been long recognized as a means of achieving justice for oppressed people. Next slide. So there are a lot of myths and I think mischaracterizations of what BDS is and what it does. I think the most important one to remember is that this is a boycott of institutions. This is a boycott of companies, of the Israeli government, of any organizations, cultural or economic or financial, that are involved and complicit in the continued oppression of Palestinians. It does not discriminate against individual Israelis. It does not discriminate against individual Israeli people or Jews. It is not an anti-Semitic action. It's often been described by people who oppose BDS to the 1930s boycott against Jewish businesses. But that was a boycott by identity. People were targeted simply because they were Jewish. It had nothing to do with their political beliefs. It had nothing to do with anything other than their Jewish identity. And that is not the case with the BDS movement. In fact, there are many Jewish leaders and many Jewish organizations that endorse the BDS movement. Another thing you'll often hear is that BDS is a call for the destruction of Israel, and that is also not true. It does call for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to their homes, and it calls for equal treatment of Palestinians within Israel, but it does not call for Israelis to be expelled from the land, and it does not call for the destruction of the nation. You also may have heard that this is only something that a few isolated intellectual Palestinians who are out of touch argue for. But in fact, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, there was a survey in 2015 that showed that 86% of the Palestinian public supports the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. The original call for BDS came from hundreds and hundreds of organizations within Palestinian civil society. So trade unions, teachers, nurses, doctors, all segments of Palestinian civil society enthusiastically support the BDS movement. So I think it's important to understand, again, that this is a movement against a society that is complicit in oppressing Palestinians and depriving them of their rights. So how does this relate to those of us in Illinois? So in 2015, a law was passed, Public Act 0990128, which set up something called the Illinois Investment Policy Board. And the mission of the Illinois Investment Policy Board is to make sure that pension funds in Illinois, so teachers, pensions funds, state university funds, follow certain guidelines. Some of those guidelines are actually divestment guidelines. So for example, pensions in Illinois cannot be invested in companies that are based in Russia, Iran, and at one point in Sudan. And the reason for that is because those countries have bad human rights records. So the state of Illinois actually supported the idea of divestment and sanction from countries that have bad civil rights records. But the primary focus of this law, the reason that this law was created, was to forbid any companies that are in the Illinois pension funds from divesting from Israel. So for Russian companies, you can't have the pension fund invested in any Russian companies, but you cannot refuse to be invested in Israeli companies. So there is obviously an inconsistency here. So the law requires that the state pension system terminate any investment in companies that boycott Israel, and also any companies that refuse to do business in the illegal Israeli settlements. Okay, next slide. So what this means is that Illinois is not being neutral on Israel and Palestine. And I also want to make clear that the point of this program is not to encourage Israel to divest from, is not to encourage Illinois to divest from Israel, but we're simply saying you should be consistent. So if you feel that it is acceptable to say that we will divest from Russia because of the human rights abuses in the Ukraine, it should be acceptable to allow the pension funds to divest from companies in Israel because they are also committing human rights abuses. But this act put Israel in a special category where it's the only country that Illinois singles out and insulates, protects from boycotts. So again, Illinois is boycotting and divesting from some countries, but it is protecting and insulating Israel from any such boycotts. But wait, there's more. It should also be overturned for the sake of human rights, but there are other reasons why this is a bad law. One thing is that we often hear, why are there not more nonviolent, peaceful ways to advocate for Palestinian rights? And you can't really think of a better nonviolent way to advocate for your rights than a boycott. A boycott is obviously not a violent form of protest. And as we said before, it was used as a nonviolent form of protest in Montgomery. It was used as a nonviolent form of protest in South Africa. But if you outlaw all nonviolent forms of protest, then it is possible that you are basically saying there is no other way to protest other than violent ones. So we feel, and many of us who support the BDS movement feel, that it is important to allow and in fact encourage nonviolent forms of protest, including economic protest. So we urge our leaders to keep open all forms of peaceful and nonviolent protest. Next slide. This also is not great for some Illinois companies. So for example, Morningstar, which those of you who deal with personal investments may know of Morningstar. Morningstar is a company based in Chicago that issues recommendations on investments. And part of their investment strategy was looking at companies that were not great investments because of political turmoil. So at one point, Morningstar issued a recommendation that investing in Israel might not be a sound investment strategy because of all the turmoil over the Palestinian situation. This was deemed by the Illinois Investment Policy Board to be boycotting Israel and thus a violation of the BDS law. Morningstar also had a human rights scan so that investors who chose to avoid investments that violated human rights would be able to see list of companies that they might want to invest in. And because of the pressure from the Illinois Investment Policy Board, Morningstar actually got rid of their human rights scan completely because they were so intimidated by what was going on with Illinois. Another company you may be very well familiar with, especially around dessert time, Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's, whose co-founders are both Jewish, by the way, both of them are very strongly supportive of Palestinian rights, and they made the decision to stop selling Ben & Jerry's in the settlements. They were not saying they weren't going to sell it in Israel, but only that they were not going to sell it in the occupied West Bank. And for that, Ben & Jerry's was added to the prohibited list, as well as Unilever, which is their parent company, which is also based in Illinois and has many of its subsidiaries in Illinois. So this law is actually affecting Illinois companies. Next slide. It's discriminatory. So not only does it put Israel in a special category where it's the only country that's protected from boycotts, but this also discriminates against Palestinians because Palestinians are not allowed to use an extremely potent form of activism to advocate for their rights. So this law is saying anybody else who wants to do some type of human rights protest through boycotting, through economic sanctions and economic boycotts, is allowed to do that, but Palestinians alone are not. And finally, although many people deny this who oppose BDS, anti-BDS laws are clearly designed to suppress speech. Now, the Illinois law is a little bit different from other anti-BDS laws in other states. There have been some that have already been ruled unconstitutional because they told individual people that they were not allowed to divest from Israel or not allowed to express support for the BDS movement. And the Illinois law doesn't do that. As I said, it really is only focusing on pension funds. But that does mean that if your organization is in an Illinois pension fund and your organization wants to show support for Palestine and wants to withdraw from Israel, You can't do it if you are part of an Illinois pension fund. So it is actually restricting the speech of Illinois residents who belong to these pension funds. And as people from the United Nations, such as David Kaye, the UN Special Reporter on the rights of freedom of expression, has said, anti-boycott legend in the US appears clearly aimed at combating political expression. So the United Nations is on record as saying that these types of laws are clearly designed to suppress speech. It also prevents companies from complying with the United Nations human rights principles. So the United Nations has concluded that it is not possible to do business in the settlements without contributing to or benefiting from human rights abuses and violations of international humanitarian law. And that the only way that companies can meet their obligations under the United Nations guiding principles for business and human rights is to stop operating in settlements. So if a company feels that it should abide by the United Nations guiding principles on businesses and human rights, then they will not be allowed to be in the Illinois pension funds. So they're going to pay a price for following the United Nations guidelines on businesses and human rights. The other troubling aspect of this law is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier with Ben and Jerry's, is it treats Israel and the illegal West Bank settlements as one and the same. Under international law, all of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal. And actually, until recently, of course, American policy is changing on a lot of things very rapidly right now. But until recently, it was not the United States policy to support the settlements. However, the Illinois BDS law also penalizes companies like Ben & Jerry's that simply say that they don't want to operate in the West Bank settlements. And so it's basically saying that they're treating the settlements and Israel as the same thing. And we know that that is partly the goal of the people on the Illinois Investment Policy Board, because their former chair said that he saw his role as protecting Israel's sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, which is a term that Zionists who want to control the West Bank in perpetuity use to describe the West Bank. When someone says Judea and Samaria, they are talking about West Bank, about Palestinian property. So from Andrew Lappin's statement about that, it's clear that part of the goal of this law is to protect Israel's control over the West Bank settlements, which is illegal under international law. So finally, just to get back to the claims about anti-Semitism. So when this law was first passed, the proponents said that it was needed to protect against anti-Semitism, implying that for anyone to oppose Israel's policies was to do something that was fundamentally dangerous to Jews. So standing up for Palestinian rights, in any way criticizing Israel's foreign policy towards Palestinians was fundamentally dangerous to Jews. And yet there is not unified Jewish opinion about this. I mean, as we say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There is no way that you're going to find any one Jewish community opinion about anything, including the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. And in fact, there was a poll that showed that 87% of Jewish voters support restricting US aid to prevent expanding Israeli settlements. Silencing dissent by criminalizing something like BDS conflicts with basic Jewish values, which is why 12 rabbis from the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights condemned Illinois' BDS law as patently unjust. Boycotting Israel is not going to endanger Jews, but what does is when you equate Jews with Israel and you basically say that all of us who are Jewish are equally responsible for what's going on in Israel. And if you describe boycotts, if you try to equate boycotts with hate speech, or you equate boycotts with violence, you are making Jews everywhere more of a target. So you are making us less safe instead of more safe. Banning boycotts is not going to make Jewish Americans safe. And in fact, the Harvard Law Review concluded that anti-BDS laws cannot be properly viewed as combating discrimination, and the weakness of the discrimination claim is constitutionally significant for BDS litigation. So What are we going to do about all this? We are going to talk about how we can repeal that public act with a new law that has recently been introduced by state legislator Abdel Nasser Rashid, HB 2723, and there's an equivalent Senate bill. And so Representative Rashid has introduced this House bill, the Illinois Human Rights Advocacy Protection Act. And it would repeal the anti-BDS law and restore our rights to engage in peaceful advocacy for Palestine, including through our pension funds, without retaliation. And it would remove those provisions which required the Illinois Investment Policy Board to include companies that boycott Israel in its list of restricted companies. And to tell you a little bit more about that and about what actions we can all take, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rebecca Levin, and I'm with the Illinois Coalition for Human Rights and Jewish Voice for Peace. So a year and a half ago, the Illinois Coalition for Human Rights was formed, and it is made up of Jewish Voice for Peace, the Committee for a Just Peace in Palestine, Israel, Palestine Activism Collective, Care Action Illinois, If Not Now, the Human Dignity Project, the Bund, American Friends Service Committee, Siraj, American Muslims for Palestine, and the Chicago Faith Coalition on Middle East Policy. And we all came together because we knew at that time that it was critical for us to form a coalition to try to undo the harmful parts of the Public Act that Leslie has been talking about. And to do that, we had to first start by educating our legislators about the situation in general in Palestine, Israel, because there's so much misinformation out there. And we spent a year doing that and trying to get people to understand that there are people of all faiths who are standing behind a human rights approach and not the approach that says that the only lives that matter are Israeli lives and Jewish Israeli lives for that matter. So we began in the spring of 2023. And we're going down to the legislature for the full year. And this year, with a new session that started in January, we decided that we would shift our focus to actually trying to undo the problematic parts of this Public Act and the effect that it has on our investments in Illinois. And as Leslie said, Representative Abdel Nasser Rashid introduced the HB 2723 along with Senator Mike Porfirio, who introduced Senate Bill 2462. They're the same bills. They're both called the Illinois Human Rights Advocacy Protection Act. And the goal of these bills are to simply take out of the Public Act the pieces that were inserted that said that it is illegal to engage in boycott of Israel for what it's doing in the Palestinian territories and to Palestinians. So the focus for 2025 of the Illinois Coalition for Human Rights, ICHR, is to get these bills passed out of committee and onto the floor so they can actually be voted on and be introduced into our own legal system right now. So what we really need for people to do is to, one, speak with their own state senators and state representatives to encourage them to be supportive of the bills. And there are multiple ways they can do it. They can say that if it were to come to the floor, they would be supportive of it. They would vote for it if it came to the floor. If it lands up in their committee, they can agree to vote it out of committee to make it to support it going to the floor. And lastly, the highest level of ask for them is to say, we would like you to be a part of co-sponsoring this legislation, whether you're a representative or a senator. We need more people from these bodies to be co-sponsors of the bills. So in addition to going to speak with your representatives in district, there are whole groups of us going down to Springfield every month to educate and advocate with legislators across the entire state. This is not just an issue for people in the Chicago metro region. This is something that is affecting everywhere in the entire state. And so we are going down as a coalition every month And we do trainings on how to do this. It's not something that you have to know how to do or feel like, oh, I've done this before, I know what to do. You don't. We will train you to do it. And we have trainings every month online for it. And then that month, later on in the month, you can come down with us to Springfield and we will help you with all the materials that you need. We will help you with all of the messaging. We will help you with everything that you need to do. But it's critical that our legislators hear from more and more people from as diverse an array of backgrounds as possible to let them know that this is something that their constituents care about. Too often when we speak with legislators, their response is, I don't want to deal with this. This is a federal issue. And what we tell them is actually you made it a state issue. When back in 2015, you passed this into our state code through the Public Act. So now it is our business. And secondly, it is affecting all of your communities, not just communities with Jews, not just communities with Palestinians, not just communities with people who are already engaged in human rights work, but all communities. And that you as a legislator need to take this seriously. So if this is something that sounds like it would be of interest to you to do, I encourage you to contact me or my colleague Janet Settle, and we will have our contact information up here. And you can see me after the program. I'm also willing to connect with you and talk with you about it. But to encourage you to think about coming down to Springfield, it's not difficult to do. You hop on the Amtrak train in downtown Chicago in the morning. It will take you down there. You spend the day speaking with legislators, and then you get back on the Amtrak train in the afternoon and it brings you back to Chicago. So it's not something complicated. It can feel overwhelming, but you have us to work with you to help you on that. And I really encourage you to think about doing it and speak with your friends, speak with your neighbors, speak with colleagues of yours, and encourage them to come down with you. And we will work with all of you to do this as well as possible. That's it.
Yeah, we can open it up for questions now.
Great.
And my apologies, Rebecca. If you would like to contact Rebecca, this is the right email, right here. You send an email and write it down. And we will send out all of these slides after the presentation. But we can do questions now.
Sure. Yes.
So these two legislators, are there any other co-sponsors at this point? Did they round up the co-sponsors? How many on each bill?
Yes, there are co-sponsors. They haven't been listed yet, but there are co-sponsors for each of the bills, but we still could use more for each of them.
It's possible to find out which ones they are, so that we
Right, that will be in the next week or so, that will be released publicly.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Yes, the law that's on the books that equates specific political campaign with violation of human rights. It just seems like such a violation of the First Amendment that you can't advocate. I wonder, has the current law been, how has it been used? Has it been used to justify like some of the repression that we saw on the campuses against the students protesting against genocide? You know, where this seems like a very long route. I can understand why you wanted to off the books, but has there been other opportunities where it's been applied where it could be challenged on that basis in the courts?
Yeah. So I think we're going to repeat the questions because we realize that the audience is not, the online audience is not going to be able to hear your questions. So the first question, which Rebecca answered, was whether there were other co-sponsors of the legislation. And the current question is, has this law been used in other ways to target free speech, such as the free speech of college students, or is it just being used to prevent investment in the pension funds? And did you want to?
Yeah, I have never heard at an event, and Leslie, if you have, you can certainly, that this specific law has been raised when attacking college students, or this specific law has been raised in other situations. But it certainly has the ripple effect of making it clear that free speech on the part of companies is not being allowed. And if free speech on the part of companies is allowed, why should it be allowed on the part of individuals? But I have never heard of it being used, this law being pulled up as a reason that people can oppress others that are speaking out.
The only other thing I would say about that is the idea that boycott, divest, sanctions is inherently anti-Semitic is a very dangerous idea. And we see things like legislation like the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and some of the executive orders, frankly, that are coming down the line that really do conflate the two. So our current law is part of just this overall environment of targeting Palestinians and equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism as a way to silence Palestinians.
I would also say that it's important to know that the law here in Illinois was the first one that was written, and now it exists in 38 states, right? And ALEC, which is the legislative policy arm that is used a great deal by the Republican Party, has taken the same legislation and used it as a boilerplate for other repressive legislation that has been passed having to do with fossil fuels, having to do with firearms, etc. So it's not just a one-off law, and that's why the power of overturning this law is so significant, because once we can do it in one state, the ability of other states to use it as a way to go after their anti-divestment laws as well will be clearer.
Yeah, about the college students, I wanted to say that for Northwestern students and most of the college students that were protesting across the nation, one of their demands for the universities was divestment, and they want the universities, which have often multi-billion-dollar endowments, to stop investing those endowments in Israeli companies or in the state of Israel itself. So in that way, it could affect these movements and these protests, because divestment is one of the goals of these protests.
Yes, sir.
I just want, with the Chicago Anti-War Coalition, and we support this, but I want to suggest an addition to the human rights, and that is to oppose Illinois state investment in Israel. The state of Illinois has $120 million at least of Israeli bonds. And it has just renewed, the state treasurer has just renewed it. And we are part of a committee that opposes Illinois, that supports divestment of Black Illinois from these bonds, and go to the state treasurer's office to oppose it and have a petition for that. And as well, there's an Illinois Board of Investments that meets here in Chicago, and its investments are not in the bonds, but it has a lot of investments in corporations that do a lot of business in Israel. So for example, one of the investment firms is BlackRock, that invests a lot in Israel. And a huge amount is invested through BlackRock, and then there's smaller.
I'm really sorry. So first of all, the people that are online are not going to be able to hear you. So I'm going to sum up, but if I left out anything, let me know. So the speaker was encouraging us to also take a look at Illinois' direct investments in Israel through Israel bonds that the Illinois treasurer, Michael Frericks, I think it is in charge of. And yes, we have a lot of money from Illinois invested, and I believe he just agreed to send an additional 15 billion to Israel. So that is also something that we should be aware of, as well as the Illinois Investment Board, you were saying, correct? So yes, and if you go to the websites for Jewish Voice for Peace, but also for Evanston Ceasefire. You can find some information about those actions as well. So thanks very much for reminding us about that.
And I would also like to say that there are representatives and senators who are very upset about the fact that these investments are being made without any kind of input from anyone but the treasurer's office. And so there is movement within the legislature to take this on as well. Yes, sir.
I was reading background about this law. Is it true that this law passed unanimously in the House? The one from 2015.
Pretty,
I don't know if it was unanimous, but it was pretty close.
Yeah.
But when we spoke with a number of legislators, this wasn't the first one that passed. It was the first one that passed. It wasn't the first one that was raised. There were two other bills that were raised that were defeated. And this one just slipped in. We were caught unawares is what happened. And we didn't do the work that we needed to do to let legislators know what was going on. And many of the legislators that we've spoken with said they just had an understanding that this was about anti-Semitism and voting down anti-Semitism, which is how, as Leslie was saying, it's often conflated. The two are conflated. So yes, it was either unanimous or it's very close to unanimous. So we are hoping that that will not be the case this next time. Yes.
Yes. So if I was a shareholder or subscriber to Morningstar, I would claim that this law was damaging my interests and my ability to invest or to earn a return. Has anyone tried to make a legal challenge on those grounds? And has the ACLU entered into your efforts to support repealing this provision?
Okay, again, going to try and summarize. The question was, since since Illinois pensions can't be invested in Morningstar, and since the Illinois Investment Policy Board essentially pressured Morningstar to change its recommendation system, could somebody who uses Morningstar sue and claim that their financial health was being damaged by this law? I mean, I think that's certainly possible. To my knowledge, there have not been any individual investors who have threatened such a suit. And the second part of your question was if the ACLU has gotten involved. So the ACLU has gotten involved in a lot of other states' anti-BDS laws, but those were states like, I think, Kansas, where individual people who say worked for the state, so a teacher or a professor who worked for the state was involved in the anti-BDS movement, and those people were threatened with losing their jobs because they supported the BDS movement. Because this is not specifically targeting individuals, as far as I know, this is not something where the ACLU has decided to get involved. I don't know if anybody knows of any.
Yeah, the one other case that I know of is that where they got involved was in the state of Georgia, where a newspaper was forced to either to stop boycotting ads that supported Israel or lose their funding. And they lost the case. But the ACLU was there and were fighting for them, but they lost the case. Yes, in the back.
Maybe a comment. But part of the question. Has there been any root of the idea that, as far as I'm concerned, the anti-BDS law is itself anti-civilian? And what I mean by that is, if the only country to which we can now apply standard human rights ideals is a country that identifies, where the government identifies itself as Jewish. I see that as being quite anti-Semitic. I don't know if that argument's been made. One support.
No, I've never heard that argument being made. One would have to also then talk about the state of Illinois as a Jewish state, which it defines itself as a Jewish state, but there
State of Israel.
I mean, the state of Illinois, right? The state of Israel. And that would be a challenging argument to be making as an advocate, where you're talking of where I don't want to get into that argument. Right. But I understand what you're saying about it, but that's not something that we have brought up. Right, right. I mean, we are constantly struggling to not have anti-Semitism and anti-Israel government, Israeli government conflated. So if we bring that back in, it can make it challenging. But I do understand what you're saying. It is a good, you know, it's something we're thinking about.
So another question here about the pension funds. So what about Chicago teachers? Are they one of the ones that cannot divest, or is it only pension funds that are associated directly with the state of Illinois?
Yeah, so the question was, does this affect, say, Chicago teachers and the Chicago Teachers Union, or is it only pension funds that are directly from the state? And yes, it is only ones from the state. So there are three major ones. There's one that I think is the State University Employees Fund. And there is a teacher's pension fund, but it's a state-run teacher's pension fund. So not the one that the Chicago teachers are involved in. But I think if you know teachers and people who are involved in the Chicago Teachers Union who are concerned about this, definitely get them to lobby their legislators, but also get them to lobby the state pension funds and try and get the state pension funds more involved in this. But no, there is a distinction between the Chicago Teachers Union and their pension fund and the state fund. Yes, see somebody in the back. Oh, you know, I'm really sorry, but there are two people who haven't spoken yet. So the gentleman right behind you in the mask. Yeah, so the question was, of the other 38 states that have anti-BDS laws, are there any initiatives to overturn those?
Yes, there are. There are none that have come as far as Illinois has, though. There's no other legislation that has been introduced in any of the other states, but there are efforts in other states to do exactly what we're doing or a variation on what we're doing. And the gentleman in front of you, did you want to ask anything? No.
No. Okay. Yeah, ma'am, go ahead.
You had another question?
Yeah, it's, has the horrendous events of the last 14, 15 months, the genocide is just so clear. You know, international tribunals finding Israel guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And now Trump saying the US is gonna take Gaza. Has this contributed? You must be finding a different atmosphere in Springfield. Does it open up people somewhat to see where this goes, where you're waiting? I mean, I know the population as a whole, the understanding Zionism as a racist genocidal ideology has.
So, yes, so the question is, right, so the question is, have the events of the past 14 months changed people's perspective in Springfield? And the answer is yes. Though I would have hoped that the slaughters of Palestinians, the land grab of the Palestinian lands, the many things that have happened over the past 75 years would have been enough. It appears that the genocide and it appears that Trump's election has moved people to say, whoa, now this is going too far. So whether that's what did it, whether it's something else, whether we don't know for sure, but yes, the ability to approach legislators and their awareness of it and their sense that maybe we've crossed a line has happened with more than had happened before.
Now's the time.
March, April, and May, come on down with us. That's exactly right. Anybody else?
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. You can have the last question. Go ahead.
Downstate, our university towns big participants in this. And we're outside of Chicago, how we find me.
Okay, so what's,
Mobilization.
the question is kind of what's the temperature on this downstate, and are the downstate universities getting very involved in this?
So yes, there are people from the universities that are getting involved, in particular from Champaign-Urbana, that are getting involved in this. And there are more legislators from downstate who are paying attention now than did before. And involvement, the Illinois Coalition for Human Rights has had a significant influx of people from around the state who want to get involved in the advocacy work and helping to make this legislation happen. When you drop a bill, that really starts things happening a lot. And the fact that this was just introduced a week and a half ago is enormous.
So if there are no more questions, first of all, again, thank you all so much for coming. This is very meaningful, I think, to all of us to have such a wonderful crowd and people who are really engaged. But as we were saying a couple of minutes ago, now is really the time. And I think I was in Springfield with Representative Rashid when he introduced the legislation. And it was a couple of days after Trump's announcement about how he was basically going to turn Gaza into Mar-a-Lago. And the excitement in the room was just palpable. So I think that we do have a really great opening here, but it's going to take all of us, not just contacting our legislators, but contacting people we know in the teachers' unions and in the state university pensions, and letting friends and family members know. Because frankly, there are a lot of people that don't realize this law exists, that have no idea that Illinois actually forbids the pensions from investing in companies that refuse to be complicit in Israeli apartheid. So even just saying to people, did you know that there is this really stupid law, and that there's a really great effort going on now to overturn it, and to not have the state of Illinois essentially weighing in on the side of apartheid and genocide. So we really hope that all of you will get involved. And I see there's one more question. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
So do you know if we call the reps that are on the committee, but we're not your constituents, will they still take note of our opinion?
Okay, that's a great question. The questioner is mentioning that her local state representative is not on the rules committee, and that the bill's been referred to the rules committee.
So yes, you definitely can call the people on the rules committee, but you can also call your representative and let them know, and your senator, and let them know how important this is to you. Because even if it's not in their committee, they all talk with each other. And if they're hearing from their constituents that this is important to them, they're going to make sure that people on the committee know that their constituents want this coming out to the floor so that they can vote on it, because this can die in committee.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's very important to get it out. So thank you for asking about that. Talk to both. The one other thing I would like to say is that I have spoken to so many people in the past month and a half who are feeling like the world is just going down, and they are overwhelmed and feel like there really isn't anything that we can do. It's just the forces are so much bigger, and it's a snowball that's going faster and faster. I would like to encourage you to pick one thing, whether or not you're doing it on Palestine, whether or not you're doing it on environmental, whatever it is, pick one thing and get engaged. And you can do it by talking, as Leslie said, you can talk one-on-one with people, and that's important work, but also getting involved in coalitions, whether it's the anti-war coalition or it is the peace and justice coalitions, whatever it is, get involved in coalitions and let your voice be magnified by working with others in groups. And certainly look into the coming with us down to Springfield. Yes.
They brought up rules and process. I tried to get Bill once. The head of the rules committee, you feel like that person, let's go with the House. You feel like that person's on your side when you bring it up, because they can kill it when you bring it up. You know,
It's all, yeah, I do. It's all work in process. Let's just say that, okay? You know, you want to say sometimes, oh yeah, it's done, and then you're surprised. Or it's like, no, this is not gonna happen, and then people change. So it isn't just a cagey kind of answer, not to really answer. The reality is this is just a moving thing, and it is a process, and there's work to be done on every one of these levels.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to make an announcement, I've got everybody here today. Next Thursday, there'll be an event here. People who travel to the West Bank will be here speaking. We'd love to have all of you come back. It's being co-sponsored by some of the same groups up here. So please come back next Thursday, 7 o'clock. We have 2 people, a couple who travel to the West Bank and Denver. They're gonna be talking about their experience in the West Bank. So spread the word.
Okay, so for those of you in the online audience, if you're in the Chicago area, this coming Thursday, the 20th, I believe, there's going to be a program again here at Lake Street Church in Evanston with discussions of people who have recently traveled to the West Bank, and we encourage everybody to attend that program as well. But also, as Rebecca was saying, you know, join coalitions, follow different groups. The other thing about Springfield work, it's really different from Washington work. I mean, people are actually happy to see you. You know, they invite you into their office. You actually get to talk to your real honest to goodness legislator as opposed to an aide. It's a very, very different experience from trying to work in Washington, in many ways, far less frustrating. So, you know, if you're feeling overwhelmed that there's nothing you can do, this is something you can do. This is something where we actually have a decent chance of winning. So don't get discouraged, don't get overwhelmed. This is something we could change. And again, thank you all so much for being part of this change with us.